Hi, I'm Jeff Miller.
I'm Anthony Navarro, and welcome to Talk Out Loud, where we share the LGBTQIA+ narrative one story at a time. On this episode of Talk Out Loud, we're here with Channyn Lynne Parker. Channyn is a human rights advocate, public speaker, community-centric leader, director of strategic partnerships for Howard Brown Healthcare Center, and serves on the board at Equality, Illinois. In 2011, Cook County Board of Corrections sat down to implement new policies for transgender inmates. This coincided with Channyn being brought on as a reentry specialist. While working at the jail, she started encouraging the inmates to have conversations that led them to think in ways that they did not know they had the capacity. This new thinking inspired worthiness and value in their lives. She then brought in non-transgender male inmates where they experienced common ground aside from their identities and realized that there is a shared humanity amongst all of us. From this experience, she realized the way things are going to get better is if all of us come together as the sum of humanity and let go of what is blocking us. Let's hear Channyn's story.
Good afternoon, Channyn Lynne Parker. We are so excited to have you with us. How's your day going?
My day is going well. I'm really excited to be here with y'all as well. But yeah, day is going pretty smooth. Pretty smooth. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome. We're in Chicago, the three of us, in separate facilities, doing this virtually. But I remember the first time Anthony and I heard you speak. I think it was for an event for Mayor Pete actually last year, and instantly I just I fell in love with your voice, and I hear a little bit of something different. It's not just Chicago. Is there? Where did you grow up?
So yes, so that's kind of a split, right? We are Southerners, originally from Baton Rouge, but I feel like I spent a lot of my informative years in the southern suburbs of Chicago. But I, before the pandemic, frequent the South, and my roots are largely still there. So yes, that is what you hear. You hear a little bit of Southerner that seemed to have never left me in the transition to the North. So yeah, absolutely.
Growing up in the South, so not growing up in the South, but you grew up more so in
Southern
Chicago,
suburbs.
southern suburbs. And your parents had grown up in the South. Is that correct?
Yes, my mother did. My father primarily grew up in the Chicago area, but yes, all originally from the South still. Yes.
So I spent a little bit of time down in Nashville for a couple of years of my childhood, and I definitely remember there was just a little bit of a, we talk about that Midwest, people, the Midwest is known for some things, hospitality and charm and just the way like we tend to treat one another. Was there anything like, and also with the South, there's also more, I guess, that it's more, actually, I think that's where more the hospitality comes from. Was there any values or morals or beliefs instilled in you that kind of cultivated between both your parents as a young child?
It's really interesting because I think that a lot of people, particularly Northerners, have a perception, sometimes very idyllic, that Southerners are inherently nicer. I think that Southerners are perhaps more performative in their politeness.
Bless your heart.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. Right. That passive aggressive sympathy, but it's really like, boy, are you dumb? Yes, exactly. Well, here's what I learned. I learned that good manners will take you where money won't. I tell you that. I learned that young. I am too a very polite person, but yes, there are moments where I'm just like, oh my God, like, is this never going to end? But yet and still, I will give you a yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, but really be reeling on the inside. So yes, I that's a lot of what was instilled in me is there is never a reason to not use good manners, even in the moment where the individual doesn't necessarily deserve them.
in knowing this, so there's good manners. So was that translated in your immediate family life?
Yes, yes,
Mm.
absolutely. My immediate family life, starting from an identity standpoint, right? Particularly for the
Mhm.
listener, I identify as a trans feminine individual, right? I am assigned male at birth. I identify and live as female. I came out, if you will, in air
Mhm.
quotes, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, to my family about this identity. And my parents leaned on their politeness, if you will, right? Their obligation to fulfill their call as my parent, meaning it is our job, it is our duty to ensure that you go as unscathed as possible into adulthood so you can stand on your own 2 feet and take care of you.
Mm.
It is not with celebration or thunderous applause that we greet your transition. However, we have enough wherewithal to recognize that if this is who you authentically are, we need to make sure that you are best able to play the hand that you are dealt.
Shannon, can I
That
ask you?
is,
Sorry,
yes,
Shannon.
please.
Just a
No,
quick
no,
question,
please go ahead.
and I really
Yeah.
appreciate this. I'm just curious. Did you feel validation through this, or was it just doing the next right thing? Or
That is a fabulous question because you actually, yeah, I thank you for segueing into that. It was more so I don't know if I necessarily felt validation, right? And this is why one of my own personal mantras is tolerance is a very dull virtue
mm,
because I can't say growing up I felt celebrated. I more so felt maybe pitied in a way, you know, pitied in the sense of a baby bird with a broken wing. Very much so of poor you, it's not your fault. I don't know how such a thing happened, but we're gonna nurse you as best as we can until you're able to take flight on your own. And that's kind of how it was growing up.
Mm.
I didn't want for anything. My parents clearly loved me and made it known that I was loved. But there was always the preparation somehow for me to expect less out of this world. And that is a struggle, I tell you, as an adult, that I have dealt with for years. The preparation that somehow life would give me less than would if I had not transitioned.
It's very heavy, and it
Yeah.
seems like a large burden to carry as a young person. When, I guess, looking back on that, what were your tools that you used to understand that that really wasn't the case?
Hmm. Another great question. I love thought provoking questions. Thank you all for asking these things. I don't know if there was ever this aha epiphany moment
Hmm.
that came to mind that made me say, this is not the case.
Mm.
Survival mode is a very tricky thing, right?
Yeah.
Because you can be in it and not actually know that you are existing. You can be surrounded by things that you never thought that you would have and a position that you never thought that you would be deemed worthy of,
Mm.
having. And yet and still be waiting for that rug to be snatched up under you. So I will tell you this: mine comes out in analysis paralysis.
mm,
Mm.
I will mill over the simplest of tasks. I will sit, stare
Mm.
at it, and feel just so paralyzed with, like, oh my God, what if I do this wrong? What if folks are really disappointed in what I'm about to do? Oh my goodness. And if I get it wrong, they're not going to have any use for me. And this is going to be a disaster. And oh my God, I'm going to end up right where folks said I was.
Yeah.
And you kind of you find yourself freaking out.
It's a
Now,
deer in headlights kind of a thing. It definitely,
yes,
yeah,
very that. Now, if I came across that same thing in a moment that I deemed to be low pressure, it would be one and done.
Yeah.
uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really something. So I don't want anyone to feel like there is like this psychology that needs to be, employed in dealing with me. But it's very interesting that those implicit traumas, if that's a thing,
Hmm.
it resonates. It
Yeah.
resonates throughout your life.
Yeah.
So,
Does.
to go back to your question of when was there this moment where I realized that that wasn't so. I don't know if I ever realized that there was a moment where it wasn't so. I think that I'm aware of when it's surfacing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
better able to keep it in check and say, Shannon, you're doing that thing again.
Yeah.
And you've got to calm down and take a breath, and you've got this.
Yeah. So myself, I completely relate to that, except instead of getting what you've got like that, instead of getting this from anyone else, I actually gave myself those thoughts after
Mhm.
I came out, and I remember one day looking in the mirror saying, "It's okay that." Maybe I'm not going to have the best job or the best career, or I'm not going to have kids, or I'm not going to have a house. And I went through a laundry list because I was happy being myself and coming out and going through that process. But I think over time, like you said, when I started realizing, well, like things were happening for me. I was getting work and getting noticed at work, and then maybe getting a promotion. And I think for me, it was more like you said, just sort of paying attention or being aware of those thoughts, and then consistently working through them when they come up, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all worthy,
That's
of all the possibilities that are out there, and that are, who we are, our identity, our orientation. None of that dictates what we're worthy of. So, when you said that, I mean, I completely related to you on, having those feelings. And for me, same thing. There's never been this like aha moment or one pivotal thing. It's just sort of been like a series of baby steps. And even to this day, I feel like sometimes I got to catch myself and be like, no, you are. This is okay. Like you can do this thing, and you can't worry too much about the consequences. So
yeah,
it's interesting how that affects all of us differently. So
yeah. That's really good. I look back at my younger years, my young adult, late teen years. I worked in a beauty shop for a significant amount of time, and this goes into your question. And there, I befriended quite a few cisgender Black women,
mhm.
and at times we would go out. Right, we would go out to bars, go out for drinks, or what have you. And I realized that, well, I was being used for a bit of bait. At
Mm,
that moment, I didn't realize that, I was actually quite an attractive young lady.
mm,
And I didn't realize I was being used for bait.
mm,
I would be there, guys would come over and want to talk to me. Well, lo and behold, right, those in air quotes friends would pull those guys off to the side and tell them about me to sway their interest away from me to them.
mm,
As skewed as that is when I began to pinpoint my value. And I don't want to say my value from the standpoint of being able to attract men, right?
mhm,
But my value in, you know what? Imagine if I could only see my own light, if I could only see my own worthiness, if I could only see that thing that others see in me, just imagine what I could accomplish.
You had a glimpse of that in that moment for the first time.
Exactly. In that
Wow.
moment, I began to have that glimpse of, you know, if I am so often used as this bait, my God, what more could I catch for myself?
Mm.
And sometimes once you see that, if the blessing is if you can unsee it, then your dimension of life is just it changes now going forward. That's amazing.
Sometimes the love you have for yourself has to far exceed your ability to criticize yourself.
Can you say that one more time, Shannon? Sorry, that's really important.
Let's hope I remember it. Um, I, I think I just said I learned that sometimes the love you have for yourself has to far exceed your ability to criticize yourself.
Mm.
You know what? And that some people that I get to have intimate conversations with on one. We say to each other, we would never talk to anyone else the way we talk to ourselves sometimes.
That's right.
No.
I find for myself that there are natural things like, I'm sitting here today, got a candle burning, a smell that I like. I listened to some music earlier that makes me feel good. I choose then to know when I'm maybe like not having the best thoughts about myself. Okay, what are the things that kind of jumpstart my day? What are these self-care things that show love to myself that then change my thoughts and acts? Like change a muscle, change a thought, kind of a thing. Move a muscle, I guess was the saying. I want to pause just because I know for myself and also some of our listeners, you mentioned that you worked at this salon for a while. You had the ability to be in public and people did not know that you're trans. Um,
Yes.
what was your coming out experience like to the rest of the world, or continues to be? Or can we talk about that a little bit?
Of course. Absolutely. So, when I was younger, and I liken myself to be the oldest young that you can get, whatever that means. So, when I was younger, and we're going to say younger, meaning late teens, talking about 18, 19, 20 ish. For me, being transgender or living in your truth, right? Lining up your body to your internal reality meant to be stealth. It meant to go into the world and not be known as being transgender. It meant, getting a 9 to 5, getting on the train like everybody else, commuting to and from work. You find yourself a good set of girlfriends at work, have lunch, whatever. And that's how I envisioned myself. Yeah, that didn't quite happen. And it wasn't intentional that it didn't happen. My coming out to the world really honestly happened because, well, number one, I worked in the beauty shop, right? I worked in the beauty shop in a space where folks knew me. So that was one thing. In a community, I should say, where folks knew me. So that was one thing. I guess we can say, not being obviously transgender from an aesthetic standpoint, folks would use that as a bit of a shock value, as a shock factor of a guess what. Again, being young, you want acceptance, you allow it to happen. Yeah, don't try that now. But 20 something years ago, of course, as I began to move into other arenas of work or professionalism, I worked with young people who were what's called perinatally infected. They were born HIV positive. And a lot of these young people were, in fact, LGBTQ identified. The common ground in some of those instances was identity, being from the same community. And there I found myself coming out to them in order to have common ground. Lo and behold, there was this job opening that came up for a project that was trans centered. Well, I said, well, I qualify for that part. And I went for it and I got it. So my life became this succession of coming outs, centering my identity as far as work was concerned. And that felt like a good thing, right? Because I felt like I am putting humanity, I'm putting a human face on being trans, right? Coming off of the heels of Jerry Springer and exploitive talk shows and all of these salacious things. Here I am, someone who can actually hold up, again, air quotes, normalcy. And as the years passed, I began to realize a certain exhaustion or fatigue that started to come around about me. Constantly having to navigate your professional career, feeling as if it is contingent upon your identity, you know, being the trans this, the trans that, the first trans that. Oh, we need a trans person. We need a trans speaker. We need to. And it was just like, my God, can I just be a content expert? Can I actually just know what I'm talking about when it comes to some things? Can I actually just be well positioned because I am the person who is qualified for this? And that positioning around identity began to get so lackluster. It did, you know. Yeah, I didn't mean to ramble.
No, that was no, I mean, that was, I mean, we followed you the whole way through that. I think, part of it is like what you said, sort of coming off the coattails of, the Jerry Springer
Yes.
show, right? Like that whole thing. And we talk about this on the show. It comes up with a lot of, different guests where, it's almost like, unfortunately for so many people, there's been a lot of groundwork that's had to be laid. And
Hmm.
it's almost like when you were saying that, it was sort of like, that was sort of what you had to do for yourself in order to be able to position yourself
Spot
to
on.
be an expert, right? To just be that person. And I think, not so much anymore, or is maybe as common anymore, but like I would just think back of like, all of the first, when Ellen DeGeneres had her not the talk show, the sitcom, and
Hmm.
when she came out on there, and then the backlash that happened from there, and then the first gay men on primetime TV was Will and Grace, and so you looking back at like all of those first, and it just seems, it seems sad and exhausting that those are
Hmm.
the things that had to happen. But I applaud you for for doing the work that you did, but then also recognizing that you're not you're not just good at this because of who you are. You're good at this because you know your stuff, your craft, your profession, and that you can be an example now to show people that we're not hiring you because of who you are or who you identify as, but we're hiring you because of the quality of the work that you can produce.
That is correct. And that goes back to that worthiness theme. And
Mhm.
when I look back at my life, child, young adult, adult, there is that reoccurring theme around worthiness. And don't get me wrong, representation does matter.
Mhm.
And for that purpose alone, I see value in identifying myself as transgender for
Mhm.
the individuals who still believe us to be incapable of doing certain things that we were originally thought not being able to do. To put forth humanity is important. And it sucks that we live in a society where you actually have to display humanity,
Mhm.
being attached to an identity, right? That should just be common sense. But unfortunately, because media and so many other factors have done such a job of dehumanizing trans folks, that when you have an individual who's privileged enough to get in front of those people who otherwise would do so, you kind of have an obligation, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So, as exhausting as it might be sometimes for me to have to censor my identity, there is a piece of me that says it is the price for the privilege. It is the price that I pay for the privilege that I have.
Mhm.
Do,
So, there are those moments where I just suck it up.
And thank you for the service and what you do, and just part of that being here with us today, and taking time to have this conversation. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this is because you invoke just thoughts in me. You connect dots in my head for myself very easily. And you help with the way you speak about life and your experience and marry that together. And, I want to just first say to anyone listening, and just like out loud to myself as well, that you helped me to realize is that all of us have identity, right? Like I can either identify with more of my true self or more of my surface self. It's not just a trans thing. It's not just a LGBTQI thing. It's for every individual. We get to, in every moment, we get to just choose, like, is this surface, or is this really true to my core? Who am I? What I believe? What are my morals? Like, who am I as a person? And I know that word moral, I used to cringe when I would hear that word moral. And people, and I remember one of my friends that was helping me work through some things in life. And he's like, let's like look at your morals. Let's take an inventory of who. And I was just like, I almost wanted to like throw up at that word. I mean, because for the longest time, I thought that I had been, as a young man growing up who wasn't out, I watched in some of my peer groups and people that I had looked up to that had taught me about how we treat people, and that some really good, wonderful lessons. But then I saw, but certain people are not worthy of this. They are not human. We don't know them. We just know of them, and they are immoral. And and when I started realizing, like, wait, I am what they are talking about, and then everything just went to hell. Because then so in that process of then, like, trying to come out 2 or 3 times and then burying that back in, and then when I finally like ran away from, for me it was I ran down to Florida, and I decided that I didn't have any values. I just kind of threw them out the window, and I had to kind of like break through that paper bag and then rebuild it on my own. And I think for anyone listening to understand the fact that, like, because some people never make it back home to that. Does that make sense?
That's right. Yes, it does make sense. It makes perfect sense.
So Channyn, for myself, what I realized is kind of what you realized, that when you had that glimpse of the power that you had with your colleagues from the beauty shop, was that it was actually an inside job. That these morals and these spiritual practices where I had felt God as a kid. Mm-hmm. That just because some of the things from those faith practices had said that I was no longer welcome, I could still like take the good and leave the bad, and still have that be something that helps me today. Going back to for yourself personally, has there been like an awakening, like, or the depth of who you are today from some of the things in your childhood, from these practices that were instilled within yourself as well?
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes and no, right? But they're both big yeses and both big nos. You used the word morals earlier, and when I think about morals, I oftentimes, that's I hate to use the word triggering, but for the lack of a better one, right? Because I think sometimes it's an overused word, but for the lack of a better word, I'm kind of like you, right? When it comes to feeling like that's such a triggering word, right? Like, morals to me are synonymous with this idea of superiority, and that morality gives you this inherent divine license to poo-poo or like turn your nose up at somebody else and still get like the golden ticket Willy Wonka thing into heaven. I don't know. So for me, I love etymology. I love words. And when I think about the word sin, we know that it has such a biting term to it. And we think about it, it invokes in us a very particular thing. In the Greek, it's actually a marksman term that means to miss the mark, literally like what people used to shoot arrows like at the bullseye. And I look at it like the mark ultimately is love. So one day in my young mind, I began to think and say, well, what if sin, if you will, is to diminish the humanity of others, and you also in turn are diminishing the humanity of yourself? And in that moment, life began to make sense. Is that what you do in this world What's important is that whatever you do, it does not diminish the humanity of others. Because when you diminish the humanity of others, you ultimately diminish the humanity of yourself. When you lift up the humanity of others, you ultimately lift up the humanity of yourself. And it just became that simple for me. Everything was totally thrown out of the window. All of the other things, all of the other edicts, everything else became simple commentary. You know?
Yeah, that's so well said, and I love words as well too. It's your journey and your curiosity with words really helps me. The word I know for myself, the word moral. What I really had to understand the word moral is truth.
Mm,
And that helped me to feel like maybe I could be friends with the word moral, or maybe we could sit down at least and talk. And then like the other word you used is sin, and
yes.
that was a trigger word for me too.
Oh my goodness,
And
yes.
um, and really, what I've come to realize for my life, where I watch out for sin in my life, let's just say, if I'm going to be comfortable with that word, is fear. And
Mm-hmm.
fear is the one thing that shoots a hole through my existence. And it shoots a hole through my existence of being able to be in connection with other people. If I allow fear to dominate that, to not know someone, to sit down and just like, we're using these like break bread with another human being.
Fear is a big one. Fear is something that just, I mean, it binds us, it holds us captive from reaching others in the the totality of who we are as humans, right? I believe that we're all here to contribute this great thing that ultimately is meant to be interconnected. And we don't realize that other people's destinies are bound into the completion of your mission. And if you are so fearful and you are just so stagnant, you won't ultimately go out and do this amazing thing that you and only you were meant to do. And you don't realize how many other people are going to fall to the wayside because you were so afraid to do this thing that was always knocking at your door. And, I definitely don't mean to wax poetic, but that's how I really have come to look at life. But, when we go back to the word morals, we get caught into this cycle of, well, we've got to go out and we've got to make ourselves a good life, right? Meaning get a good job, be a good neighbor, be a good colleague, be polite, right? Um, do all the things that are attached to being a good person, moral. And then you attach yourself to missions and values and things that you ultimately realize you're losing yourself. And that divine spark in you, whatever you want to call it, is beginning to dim. And it's beginning to dim because you, in fact, are frustrated with yourself because you are misaligned. And I think that's when we begin to become old bitter folks. That constant misalignment of core value because you want to be morally in alignment with what it is that you've been taught means to be a good person, good neighbor, all these other things. And we let our lives go by, 10, 20, 30 years, and we end up becoming a shadow of ourselves. And we say, what happened to me? What happened? So I would urge you and the listeners to not become that, but always do a self inventory of who you are. What is this thing that just makes you light up? What would you do for free if money were not required for living? That to me is moral.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many of us put so much effort and energy into, daily exercise. So, we're physically taking care of our bodies. So many people are now, on, eating the right way. So we're taking care of, the inside of our bodies. But it seems like when it comes to taking care of ourselves from a mental perspective or a spiritual perspective, doing that extra work, whether it's daily journaling or creating gratitude lists or just taking the time to, like you said, take an inventory of, what is it that I'm feeling? What am I paying attention to? What are the things that I'm supposed to be here? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And I know for me, when this is not all the time, but I know that when I spend time paying attention to sort of those clues that start showing up on, like, okay, well, this is where I'm supposed to go next, or this is what I'm supposed to do next, or having sort of taking that moment to be able to really be grounded and centered and listen sort of to that little voice inside, or your heart, or, however you want to call that. But it takes you then to the next place. It takes you to the next step. And I know when I don't listen to that voice, that's where I get stuck. And then I'm stuck in fear. And then it all of a sudden becomes this cycle where I'm trying to get out. And really all it then takes is getting quiet again and then redoing that work to be able to, pull myself out of sort of that rut that I'm stuck in, and being able to figure out, okay, well, what's the next thing that I'm supposed to be doing?
That's right. You know something? I tell you, this is one thing that I've learned, and this came to me as I was sitting here listening to you. You will never have to figure out the right words to say if you are speaking from your core and you are anchored with missions that are resonant to who you authentically are. You will never have to struggle for the words to say.
No.
And I noticed that, that's right. And I noticed that I struggle with the words to say only when I am misaligned.
You talked about these values and morals and principles, and inventory, I think, is a word we've all three have used now. About 10 years ago, I found myself on a farm, and after working in the fashion industry for about 10 years, and back in the Southwest Michigan where I grew up, and I always loved the idea of being a farmer, a veterinarian, or things in nature. But I also loved fashion as well too. Three things I loved, and so I ended up at this farm with someone who had been away for a while, and I started working as a farmer with my friend on this vineyard, this Welch's grape juice vineyard, out of all things, right? And there's a point to this story, so follow me just for a second, if you don't mind. So in the third year or fourth year, my friend got cancer, and then a year or two after that, he passed away, and he left me the option to buy a portion of his farm, and it had been like a two generation farm, right? So picture this barn of tools and machinery, for this 100-acre farm, nothing too crazy, but that had been run by a family and capable of, one or two, three people running the business. And I knew, when he had been my teacher, and he would always know, like, oh, that tool's over there, this and that, because he knew that from the back of his hand. He knew that barn like the back of his hand. What I saw was a bunch of things, and I didn't know the difference of. I only knew like the 10 or 7 tools we used every season. And, after he passed away, and I found myself knowing this was my mission at the time, that my mission was to continue to farm that land, produce a product, a crop, to share with the world, and provide experiences there for also people to come and stay on the weekends as they Airbnb. And I had this moment, like the first season after he was gone, and I was farming by myself, and I realized I was going down to the hardware store to buy like a new part, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And I realized, I'm like, I have to find out what is it that's serving the purpose of this farm today, not what was serving the purpose of this farm 10 years ago or 30, 40 years ago, because it's just getting in the way of me accomplishing what this farm is supposed to do today. And so I took the time every night after work. I'd go out there and I would just kind of like make piles from left to the right. Like, what do I know? Do I know what this is? Am I using this? Or should I find out what this is? And so I would go online and ask other farmers on these blogs. I take pictures of stuff and be like, what is this? And anything that I didn't have a use for or thought I wouldn't use, it just had to go because it was blocking me from accomplishing my mission in the years to come on that farm.
That's right.
And for me, that was like, I just had this realize about like that there are things that we all pick. We're all humans. You know, none of us get this instruction manual. Our parents, it wasn't given to them. There was no magic wand waved above them that said, oh, you're now magically your parent. You know everything. You know, there was nothing for us on the first day of school that said, okay, this is how it's going to go throughout the rest of the day. And so to be able to be okay with, you know what, maybe this was something or a friendship or a principle that served me for a while, but it's no longer helping me accomplish my mission today. And to be okay with blessing it for what it was in my life previously, but then letting it go.
That resonates with me. You know, again, we're talking about morals and what it means to us and our own spiritual paradigms, you know, however we define those things. And I think about, you know, where it says, you don't put new wine into old skins, you know, because the skins will burst from the newness and the freshness of that wine that you're pouring. And so often that's what we find ourselves doing. And if we look at today's climate, we have individuals who once did what was a new thing in their pursuit of liberation and equity and so on and so forth. And they're trying to take those formulas and they're trying to apply them to the new wine skins of today, which are our young, fierce advocates and activists and so on and so forth. And here they are trying to do this new thing, and we're continuously trying to pour old wine, you know, or new wine into these old skins, this old formula. So to what you said about the farm, right, is you have this structure, this thing that can do a new thing, but yet and still we just want to use old formulas to do something, right? Because that's what we're comfortable with, because we're scared of what anything else looks like, because we don't have a formula for that. It's unknown to us. And this is why I'm always so adamant about everyone having a seat at the table, everyone having a voice, all of us reaching across the divide and saying, hey, look, I know you are scared. I know that you have been taught that because of this thing that you have or because of this person that you are, that this would work out. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you it's not. So please, can you join the sum of humanity and let go of those things that have been impeding you from living out the fullness of your whole humanity, but also joining the sum of all of us? Can you let those things go? And that's the biggest thing that breaks my heart in what I see today is we're all vying for space, and we all, you know, have our very valid viewpoints and ideas and realities, and we're not hearing each other, whether that's purposefully or unintentionally. But we've got to pause. We've got to stop. We've got to recognize that here we are in the dark, in this mad, fearful frenzy, and we're just bumping into each other and creating chaos. We have got to slow down. We've got to pause, and we've got to hear each other. Otherwise, this mess is just going to continue and nothing's going to get done.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's right on. I think sometimes, you know, we think that as an individual, not that we're powerless, but that as one person, we don't have the power to create any sort of influence on any other people. For myself, this was back in 2012 when President Obama came on. You know, he was in an interview and he said that there should be marriage equality. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't have the power that he has. Power meaning the ability to broadcast my viewpoint and influence to the entire world. And I had to look in and say, what is it that I can do? And what I was able to do was
being a part of, the event and wedding industry, I was able to rally the wedding and event industry on a local level to come together to produce, various videos and content that we created and shared through social media and our shops and, all of that to showcase our support for marriage
That's
equality.
right.
So I think what, is important for people, for all of us to remember is that you don't need a talk show. You don't need to be the president of the United States. You don't need 100,000 Twitter followers. It really comes down to, when you hear something or you feel something where that maybe it's not being done the right way, or that your voice or someone else's voice is not being heard. It's what can you do with the platform that you have? It could be 5 people that you may be able to reach, but all it takes is for one other person to maybe hear what you have to say, and whether that influences them or changes their mind or just opens their mind to something that they've never thought of. And it's just important to remember, and I'm saying that as to remind myself,
Yes.
that it doesn't have to be this big, powerful, sort of, act that, sort of changes the entire way, a whole country of people think. It's just those little things are what adds up. And it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the sort of all of this work that you've done in your, that you've had to go through to get to where you are today. It's the same kind of thing. It's every step. It's just those little stepping stones. And I'm sure that you have inspired or touched or, help people understand who you are along the way.
I would like to believe so. I kind of think of myself as a bit of a Johnny Appleseed, if that makes any sense, right? He was just kind of trudging along, and I almost envision him just eating apples. And well, hell, who eats the seeds, right? You spit them out. And consequently, apple trees bloomed behind him and around him.
Yes, yeah.
I look at myself as kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't think in half the time I don't even remember the stuff I say. I'm just like, oh, I said that. I'm like, oh, that's great. I'm glad you got something out of it. Go get them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think, I eat the fruit that I've been given, and I spit out seeds, and I hope they land on good soil, and I hope that posterity comes along and is able to benefit from what bloomed.
Channyn, you mentioned earlier about all of us having a seat at the table. I remember reading the article about Cook County with some of the reform that took place in 2011, that I believe that you came in afterwards.
I did.
Yeah, so just a little backstory for everyone, and please correct me if there's anything that's not correct here. Before 2011, Cook County here in Chicago had no official rule for placing transgender detainees together. And that year it became one of the first in the country to implement such a measure. But from what I've understood which is great, but there wasn't really any transgender people that were at that table when it came to some of this policy. I do know that afterwards you came on board. Can we talk about your experience and what that was like? And
yeah, absolutely. So again, y'all might hear that smile on my face. That was some of the most rewarding work in my life. It's crazy because I always knew I'd go to jail. No, but yes, I worked in Cook County Department of Corrections for about 5 years. And I tell you, I found such peace behind those walls. It's very, very, very interesting thing to say, but the work was just good work. So as you said, right before that, trans people were housed in cells with male identified folks. And that was a no-go for many reasons, as you very well may know. PREA came out, right? The Prison Rape Elimination Act. And I don't remember what year that was. It may have been right around that same time. And PREA was a federal mandate that began to hold incarceral systems accountable for vulnerable populations. Vulnerable, not necessarily just meaning trans identified, but individuals who were disabled, who were maybe less apt to, defend themselves, things like that. Trans identified individuals and individuals based off of other particular factors qualified for that as well. What was happening was you had prison and jail administration who would just say, okay, fine, separate them, leave them in their cells. And that's no good, right? Because other folks in these incarceral systems were still taking classes, were still engaging in improvement things like barbershop, GED programs, advocation. And then you had trans identified folks who were literally just left to atrophy in their cells in segregation. And a very kind officer took notice of this, and she reached out to me and said, I don't know where to begin. Can you help me? And there began my work with trans identified folks who were incarcerated. The group that we formed was really just a very topic and discussion group. It was almost kind of like Seinfeld, right? There was really no real solid direction. It was just like, I don't know, we just talked. And I eventually kind of like informally coined it Big Talk because I don't like small talk, as y'all probably well know. If we're standing outside and you say to me on today, boy, it's cold out. Well, I don't want to curse on the air. But yeah,
Go ahead.
no shit. Yeah, we're both standing out here clearly. So I encouraged conversations that brought up things that made you think and think in ways that you didn't know that you had the capacity to think of. And I began to bring in non-trans folks because I wanted us all, as we talked about earlier, to see that we have common ground aside from our identity and that there is humanity here amongst us all. That was probably the pinnacle of my career, was working with individuals for them to see their worthiness, their value, that for me, that was just amazing work.
It is extremely important to do. I think what you started doing there was you were enlightening people to understand and see that we're really not all that different from each other.
Correct.
And going back to what you were talking about earlier, how whether we say the media or just these sort of societal norms that are put on us, that we sort of have to put people into boxes or have to categorize people to sort of understand them or say this person is this and this person is this. And when you allow people from different backgrounds to come together to start having conversations, we all just realize, we're very much alike in many more ways than we are not alike.
Yeah, we want to believe somehow that folks are just going to autocorrect and come to these epiphanies on their own. And there's a select few people who, are able to do this, right? But for the most part, we all kind of go back to the things that we were taught and we just relive them over and over and over again until somebody comes along and shatters all of that and says, no, that's incorrect. So yes, I know how that feels. That just goes back to what I was saying, working in the jail that's exactly what that did. And when we think about the safety of trans folks in community, right? Like some of the listeners here are no stranger to the violence that trans people experience in systems, physically, emotionally, psychologically, so many other things. But we can stave off some of that if folks get the opportunity to see wow, you know what? This is an individual who is a whole person, just like me, who I have something to learn from. And I see that we're more alike than not. You know, I'm not saying that that is the solve all, but it's a start. It's a huge start.
It's a jumping off point, right? It's where we have to start somewhere. And I feel like, you go back and you look at any civil rights movement, and
Yes.
any group, there has to be a place to start from. And through time and through action, and again, just letting people get to see who we are, it really starts sort of breaking down whatever story you've been told or you've told yourself, whether it's learned or you've seen it on, going back to, you were saying earlier, those Jerry Springer shows, whatever story you've told yourself, or whatever belief you've given, those barriers start to break down. And I feel like, in so many ways, not just when it comes to, people who are trans or gay or intersex or, whatever it is, we see people's, just someone walking down the street. And I mean, we're all guilty of this. You in your head start, making up the story of who that person is before they even open their mouth. And it's so important to be able to not only not do that, but give people the space to show you who they really are.
That's right.
I know for myself that I have been able to meet some really just amazing people that have helped teach me and have helped broaden and continue to teach. There's a lot that there's so much I don't know. And you talked about like planting these seeds. It really doesn't take too much work. You just kind of outlive your life and you're planting these seeds, just being who you are. Part of that also is wisdom and true life, speaking truth to things, and understanding that sometimes that I didn't understand really like how the violence against trans women, not being the violence per se, and also that is inflicted upon them, and then also not being able to hold a job, and sex work being something that it becomes like a last chance resource. That people don't just choose these things. It's kind of you work with what you have. Does that make sense? And I don't want to speak to somebody else's experience.
Makes sense. I understand what you're saying. Yes. We know that due to trans folks' identities, that oftentimes they face barriers that leave them excluded from participating in certain systems, right? A lot of times trans folks are denied the access to thrive. And that is something that is really profoundly impactful in a detrimental way for trans folks. We know that trans people are more likely to statistically make less than $10,000 a year for the rest of their lives. The harm that trans folks face are not necessarily always just physical, though that's a huge one, i.e. death, but there's also the harm of discrimination. There's the harm of discrimination from medical systems, housing systems, employment, so on and so forth. And ultimately, right, those things do lead to survival crimes. Those are very real realities for trans folks. But while those very real occurrences do happen, there's also resilience that comes from the trans community. There is also an incredible amount of strength. There's also the ability to take those situations and turn them into incredible advocacy points, So there are so many pieces of resilience that come up, and we see incredible leaders rising up from the what would be rubble and just becoming awesome advocates for not only the trans community, but for communities at large.
I want to just kind of like venture off to a little bit of a different conversation. And that would be, can we talk about family lineage and some things about your history? And
of course,
go there.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So my mother particularly sparked a love of ancestry into me at a very early age. And we talked about resilience earlier, right? And a part of that resilience is to know that you stem from a whole line of survivors. I mean, obviously, right? The two of you are sitting there because you are the lucky contestants of individuals who survived long enough to have children of their own, going way back to the beginning of time. Somebody did, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here. So same, right? The patriarch, if you will, of my mother's side of the family is my great great grandfather. His name was Sanford Alexander. He was he was born about 200 years ago, and he was enslaved in South Carolina, was sold to New Orleans. He lived to be 106 though, so he died in the 1920s, which was really cool. But that resilience is what I lay claim to in my own bloodline. If I stem from someone who can survive that, I can do anything. So yes, lineage is really important to me. Also, on my father's side, that is a very interesting familial line. We go back to 1740. My sixth great grandfather's name was Sylvester Beverly, and he fought in the Revolutionary War. So, I kind of chuckle at the fact that here I am, a Black trans woman who I suppose am a daughter of the revolution.
Yes. Well, rightfully so, yeah.
Yes, so maybe I'll go sign up for DAR. I don't know, but yes, those are those really cool intersectional things that I really love and embrace about myself. Right, that you learn from conversation like we're having right now.
Yeah, I think it's always important to know where you come from, to know
right.
those people. I know, Jeff has been to enough of my, family gatherings, where sort of that older generation of, dad, aunts, and uncles sit around the table, and, they're talking about great grandparents, and they're talking about how, what they did, and their, how, they immigrated, from, different countries to come here, and, what they had to do in order to, make ends meet. And it's so important to know that, because like you said, it's almost like it allows you to, well, it gives you a couple things. I feel like for me, it gives me a little bit of empowerment to know that if my grandfather, could immigrate from Italy by himself and start a life for himself here, and, had to work 2 jobs and to do all of this, that I'm standing on his shoulders because of all that work that he's done. I am now able to be or have the life that I have because of all of his work, and not just him, but then, his father and his father's father, and,
That is correct.
all the way down. So I think it's so important. I think that I also think too, you get to know, where you come from. And I think being able, it's almost like a warmth and a comfort to know when you come from. My family is very, I would say, they're just so loving and caring, but fun and lighthearted, and love to laugh and joke and all of that. And to know that that's where we come from, sort of this mix of work and whatnot. It really helps influence. It's really helped influence me to who I am today.
Absolutely. I know the feeling, I love how you said standing on the shoulders of others, because that is in fact what we do. I have this very hodgepodge belief, right? So, there's pieces of me that do practice, an ancestral practice that I absolutely believe that every generation stands on the shoulders of the other. And in doing so, you elevate your bloodline. I oftentimes, when I'm sitting quietly in meditation and I'm having an issue with something, I will sometimes say, I call upon the surviving intelligence of those of you who existed before I did, who faced a similar issue.
Mm.
And I call on that wisdom that is inside of what I call my liquid memory or DNA, however you want to call it.
In your my bones, right? It's
Yes, exactly. And that's in all of us. That's in all of us. And I believe if you get still enough, you hear their wisdom, their mistakes, their successes, and you apply it to your life. And you recognize that you will one day be an ancestor, whether that is of affinity or of blood. So it's so important that you lead a good life so you leave a good legacy.
Yeah. Oh, Channyn, I'm learning. You've got me. You're teaching.
yeah.
I know what I was going to say is when it comes to, I agree with everything that you just said. I think what's also important to remember too is to listen to and have the conversations with your family who's still here. I know that I think about conversations that I've had with other family members who are not alive anymore and the wisdom that I've learned from them. Like you said, Channyn, where you call upon, when you're in meditation, you're calling
Yes.
upon sort of the wisdom that's inside of you, inside your DNA. I know that for myself, when I'm in those moments where I'm maybe not sure how to handle a situation, I say, whether it was maybe my mom who's passed away or one of my grandmas who's passed away, I may think, well, what would they do? How would they handle this? And the only reason I'm able to call on that wisdom was because I put the time and energy and effort into our relationship and to truly get to know one another, but then also not just have that small talk, to be able to have big talk. And I think about the wisdom that my grandma passed on to me. It has shaped and changed my life in so many ways, so many times. And I think that, it just is important to remember, we need that wisdom from way back when, but also a lot of that wisdom is sort of right in front of our eyes, and make sure to take advantage of that before those people are gone.
I love that. Thank you for reminding me of that. That is so true.
Yeah.
Channyn, so I know that you've identified that, meditation is something that you find yourself in. I'm just curious, like on a given weekend or on a Friday night, what's your ideal weekend look like? What brings you joy today? What's that?
What does my ideal weekend look like? Zoning out. Literally, I cook. I sit in quiet. I rarely cut on my TV. I don't know why I even pay a cable bill. It's ridiculous. I sit in quiet. I enjoy my peace. The fact that I'm not obligated to do anything,
Mm-hmm.
that's what a weekend looks like for me. I know I function as an extrovert because of my job, but I really am an introvert. And then I'm an extrovert, also an elder millennial on the cusp of Gen X. So trust me, like I'm a latchkey kid. Like I was made for this. Like this. I can do this standing on my head with like some ramen noodles, like whatever, So,
That's great.
so yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and taking some time to just share your story and some of your wisdom and to teach us some things about life that we didn't know before today. So thank you so much, Channyn.
Oh my goodness. Thank you all for having me.
Of course.
To the listeners, thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it.
And Channyn, post-COVID, we're going to meet up and we're going to get a big hug from each other.
Please, let's do it.
That's how I feel after this conversation.
Let's do it. And for the audience out there, if you ever see me at a bar post-COVID, my favorite cocktail is a gin gimlet with Hendrix with a twist of lime and an olive.
Don't skip on the Hendrix either now. Come on.
What an important conversation to have, especially as We're going into the holiday season. Channyn's wisdom is beyond her years, and Jeff and I can't thank her enough for helping us close out the first season of Talk Out Loud. Be sure to visit our website at www.talkoutloudlive.com and visit Channyn's profile. She provided us with some great resources, including some books, articles, and places where you can donate to some amazing causes. As we are coming to a close of the year, we're going to be taking a short break on releasing new episodes. I can't tell you how wonderful it's been this first season with you, making time for us every week, letting our storytellers come into your homes and listening to their stories. We will be back with season 2 of Talk Out Loud on Wednesday, January 6th. And I promise we have some insightful conversations we're having, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thank you again for all of your support by listening, shopping in our bookstore, and getting your Talk Out Loud gear. We really thank you so much for that. And as always, remember to be true, be you, and to talk out loud. Have a wonderful holiday season and Happy New Year.